Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so we are continuing reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Gantra Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm reading from chapter 9, the passing away of Bhishmadev in the presence of Lord Krishna. And today, unless I'm mistaken, we're covering text 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so some of you might have your Srimad Bhagavatams there, so you can follow along the reading. So text 8, 198, Srimad Bhagavatam. Anyecha manayo brahma radhadyo malaha sishe upeti ajhagmo kasyapangira saddayaha. And many others like Sukadeva Goswami and other purified souls, Kasyapa and Angirarasa and others, all accompanied by their respected disciples, arrived there. Purple. Sukadeva Goswami, Brahmarata, the famous son and disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, who taught him first the Mahabharata and then Srimad Bhagavatam. Sukadeva Goswami recited 1,400,000 verses of the Mahabharata in the councils of the Gandharvas. In the council of the Gandharvas, Yakshas and Rakshasas. And he recited Srimad Bhagavatam for the first time in the presence of Maharaj Parikshit. He thoroughly studied all the Vedic literature from his great father. Thus, he was a completely purified soul by dint of his extensive knowledge in the principles of religion. From Mahabharata, Shabapava 4:11, it is understood that he was also present in the royal assembly of Maharaj Yudhisthira and at the fasting of Maharaj Parikshit. As a bona fide disciple of Sri Vyasadeva, he inquired from his father very extensively about religious principles and spiritual values. And his great father also satisfied him by teaching him the yoga system by which one can attain the spiritual kingdom, the difference between fruitive work and empirical knowledge, the ways and means of attaining spiritual realization, the 4 ashrams, namely the student life, the householder life, the retired life, and the renounced life. The sublime position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the process of seeing him face to face, the bona fide candidate for receiving knowledge, the consideration of the 5 elements, the unique position of intelligence, the consciousness of the material nature and the living entity, the symptoms of a self-realized soul, the working principles of the material body, the symptoms of the influential modes of nature, the tree of perpetual desire, the psychic activities. Sometimes he went to the sun planet with the permission of his father, Naradaji. Descriptions of his travel in space are given in the Shantipava of the Mahabharata 332. At last he attained the transcendental realm. He is known by different names like Araneya, Arunisuta, Vyasaki, and Vyasyamaja. Kashyapa, one of the Prajapatis, the son of Marichi, and one of the sons-in-laws of Prajapati Daksha. He is the father of the gigantic bird Garuda, who was given elephants and tortoises as eatables. So he's not a vegetarian. Elephants and tortoises as eatables. He married 13 daughters of Prajapati Daksha, and their names are Aditi, Diti, Tanu, Kashta, Arishta, Surasa, Lal, Muni, Krodavasa, Tamra, Surabi, Sarama, and Timi. Excuse me. He begot many children, both demigods and demons, by those wives. From his first wife, Aditi, all the 12 Adityas were born. One of them is Vamana, the incarnation of Godhead. This great sage Kashyapa was also present at the time of Arjuna's birth. He received a presentation of the whole world from Parashuram, And later on, he asked Parashuram to go out of the world. His other name is Arishtanemi. He lives on the northern side of the universe. Angira Rasa. He is the son of Maharaj and Angira and is known as Brihaspati, the priest of the demigods. It is said that Dronacharya was his partial incarnation. Sukracharya was the spiritual master of the demons, and Brihaspati challenged him. His son is Kacha, and he delivered the fire weapon first to Bharat Vajra Muni. He begot 6 sons like the fire god by his wife Chandramasi, one of the reputed stars. He could travel in space, and therefore he could present himself in the planets of Brahmaloka and Indraloka. He advised the king of heaven, Indra, about conquering the demons. Once he cursed Indra, who thus had to become a hog on the earth and was unwilling to return to heaven. Such is the power of the attraction of the illusory energy. Even a hog does not wish to part with his earthly possessions in exchange for a heavenly kingdom. He was a religious preceptor of the natives of different planets. A side point here, sometimes we hear this story told in regards to Indra being, no, he was cursed by Brihaspati, wasn't it? And then Brahma came because he wanted him back into his duty as Indra. Yeah, he was cursed by, we're hearing cursed by Brihaspati, and then Lord Brahma came, and he was quite comfortable, described there. Yeah, he became quite attached. It attached to the mud, attached to his situation with his young piglets and his wife, and he was lounging around in the mud, and it all seemed so comfortable. Sometimes it's described that it had rained the night before, so the mud was really slushy and soft. So he was surrounded by the objects of the senses, and he didn't want to give that up. So I think the story then goes on to explain that how then Lord Brahma took his sword, or took a weapon, and then killed him. So he was forced to go back to his position. Yeah, side point. Let's just read the next verse then. Okay, 199. Everyone can hear me okay? I guess silence means yes. If not, if you can't hear me, just tell me to speak up, or yeah. Okay. Tam samattan mahabhagan upalapya vishatamaha pujayam asadamokno deshakala vibhagavit. Translation: Bhishmadev, who was the best among the 8 Vasus, received and welcomed all the great and powerful rishis who were assembled there, for he knew perfectly all the religious principles according to time and place. Expert religionists know perfectly well how to adjust religious principles in terms of time and place. All the great acharyas or religious preachers or reformers of the world executed their mission by adjustment of religious principles in terms of time and place. There are different climates and situations in different parts of the world, and if one has to discharge his duties to preach the message of the Lord, he must be expert in adjusting things in terms of time and place. Bhishmadev was one of the 12 great authorities in preaching this cult of devotional service, and therefore he could receive and welcome all the powerful sages assembled there at his deathbed from all parts of the universe. He was certainly unable at that time to welcome and receive them physically, because he was neither at his home nor in a normal healthy condition. But he was quite fit by the activities of his sound mind, and therefore he could utter sweet words with hearty expressions, and all of them were well received. One can perform one's duty by physical work, by mind, and by words, and he knew well how to utilize them in a proper place, and therefore there was no difficulty for him to receive them, although physically unfit. And I think we finish on this verse, text 10 today. Krishnam chatat prabhavat gyan ashinam jagat ishvaram hritistam pujayamasa mayopata vigraham. Translation. Lord Sri Krishna is situated in everyone's heart, yet he manifests his transcendental form by his internal potency. This very Lord was sitting before Bhishmadev, and since Bhishmadev knew of his glories, he worshipped him duly. Purple. The Lord's omnipotency is displayed by his simultaneous presence in every place. He is present always in his eternal abode, Goloka Vrindavan, and still he is present in everyone's heart, and even within every invisible atom. When he manifests his eternal transcendental form in the material world, he does so by his internal potency. The external potency or the material energy has nothing to do with his eternal form. All of these truths were known to Sri Bhishmadev, who worshipped him accordingly. Om Gyanatimarandasya Ganandana Salakaya Chakshum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So thank you again for inviting me. I think Kuna Chaitanya Prabhu invited me a few months ago, but it wasn't possible. But I thought, and then he invited me again, and as I'm in Leicester, I thought, how can I say no? And I have to adjust my schedule here. But I'm happy to be here in Leicester. I'm happy to be given this opportunity to try and share whatever little realizations I have on this wonderful part of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, this account of the leaving of grandfather Bhishmadev, it's one of my favorite parts of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And although a great many details is given here, it's described in quite an elaborate way in the Mahabharata, especially in the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata. The Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata is more or less, it is the complete teachings that grandfather Bhishmadev gives to Maharaj Yudhisthira. And there isn't anything that grandfather Bhishmadev does not explain to Maharaj Yudhisthira. Every subject we can possibly conceive of in relationship to the earth, the universe from the material aspect, and every aspect of the transcendental world, and every aspect, and specifically, well, it seems that way because I've tried to read through it a few times in the Shanti Parva, and it's so deep and it's so profound that I've never actually got to the end of it. It's like going into an ocean. And there's wonderful description, and the main advice or the main shiksha that Bhishmadev gives to Maharaj Yudhisthira is the duties of a king and the duties of ruling, obviously, because this is the lamentation of Maharaj Yudhisthira. And he gives them all types of instructions. For instance, he gives even instructions about what type of spies to have in your kingdom and where to place them, etc. You should place them in public places. You should place them in places of entertainment. and it takes some perhaps some understanding and some purpose, because there's some from today's perspective, some of the directions that's given by Bishop Dev to the would-be king, Maharaj Yudhisthira, would, even by today's account, seem quite drastic in defeating an enemy, for example. I'll give you one little example that comes to mind. That one should poise, he says, in order to defeat an enemy or the kingdom of another king, one should poison all the wells, one should chop down all the trees that give shade, one should kill all the livestock. Goes into, so that needs a purport that to be understood. But those type of things are described there. But before that description begins, the Shantiparva begins with the lamentation of Maharaj Yudhisthira. Yeah. Now, the Mahabharata or the Battle of Kurukshetra, there was, how many people were killed? In 60 million, something I heard. I've got Gaura Krishna Prabhu here and Shantanu, so if you see me speaking over to them, anyway, millions, countless millions of people had been killed. And the Shantiparva describes how they spent 2 months doing the last rites. And there was thousands of Brahmins there doing the last rites for the millions of troops that had been killed. And at the same time, there was hundreds of thousands of wives, daughters, and mothers who were greatly lamenting. So that, just try and picture that scene. Thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of women and wives and relatives and grandparents were lamenting. And also described that because grandfather Bhishma had been laid low, as we know, he was on a bed of arrows. So, and that happened, that's not at the end of the battle, I think it's somewhere in the middle of the Battle of Kurukshetra that he was laying low by Arjuna, wasn't it? And it describes there in the Shantiparva how there was guards set around grandfather Bhishma there, because also describes that at night, generally all the jackals would come for a feast. And the Rakshashas would come at night as well to feast on the dead bodies. So there was guards were guarding grandfather Bhishma at that time. Yeah. But the main point, which I specifically have found it very fascinating, is Yudhisthira Maharaj he's in the same position as Arjuna. Arjuna was completely bewildered about his duty and wanted to perhaps take up the begging profession, or wanted to not do his duty as a Kshatriya, as we know in the Bhagavad Gita. So Yudhisthira Maharaj at this point, because he's a devotee, so he's very soft-hearted. So when he saw the mass destruction and all the lamentation of thousands of people, millions, he saw himself as being the cause. And he couldn't bring himself to actually sit on the throne. Then there's a discussion between him and the Pandavas and also other sages, and all given different arguments and give different reasons why he should take up and be the emperor. But Maharaj Yudhisthira is adamant, and he gives these wonderful arguments glorifying renunciation, which when you hear him speak, when you hear him explain, it sounds like the right thing to do for him. He explains it in such a wonderful way because he's Dharmaraj. But the Pandavas and other sages there, they hear him, but they're of a different opinion. and then they give their arguments against him, and it goes on like this for quite some time. For example, there's one argument because we all know how Bhima felt about the whole thing, about being banished. He described he was so angry, so intent was his meditation upon revenge that he would hold rocks and he would crush them to dust, waiting for that time when he could seek revenge. And now the battle's done, and they're about now to establish Yudhisthira as the king, and Yudhisthira doesn't want to be the emperor. Again, because he's soft-hearted nature as a devotee. And that just reminds us also of Arjuna. He didn't want to fight, and Prabhupada mentions in the purport state, it wasn't because he was afraid, it's because his nature as a devotee. Yeah. But that wasn't the mentality of Duryodhana and co. Yeah. But Arjuna, so Arjuna similarly here, like Yudhisthira Maharaj. And so when Bhima saw Yudhisthira in such a state, anyway, he started to accuse him of quite a few unpleasant things. And one of the things he says, what is the point? It's just like if you embark on a journey, you embark on a long journey, and just before you get to your destination, then you turn around and go back. What's the point? And he gave another example as well. If someone climbs up a tree to get honey, and you get right up to the top where the honey is, and then you turn around and come back down, what's the point? So he gives so many arguments against it. Maharaj Yudhisthira gives more arguments, and Sahadev, Nakula, Arjuna, and other sages as well. There's this lengthy discussion, which describes the glories of domestic life against the glories of renunciation. So there's a whole discussion on the Dharma of a king and all the good results that come from that. And then Yudhisthira Maharaj then explains that he glorifies the peacefulness of the sages. So it's not just a 5-minute conversation. There's a lengthy discussion there in the Shantipava. Now, then eventually, as coming here now in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna then, actually even Krishna tried to speak to Yudhisthira Maharaj as well to actually persuade him. And at that point, it's described that he accepts. And so then at that point, Krishna brings him, they all come to see Bhishma Dev. Yeah, this is where we join it here in the verses we're reading today. And the sages that come and the rishis that come, it's pretty profound who is actually wants to be present there, because everyone's heard, or everyone knows about the glories of grandfather Bhishma Dev, and they all know that he's a great devotee of the Lord. So everyone wants to come to see the passing of a great devotee. Yeah. This was the same with when Maharaj Parikshit was cursed. Yeah. These sages knew he was a great devotee of Krishna, so they all came, because this is going to be a wonderful, auspicious occasion. Yeah, the passing of a great devotee. So therefore, we hear all these different sages have come, and grandfather Bhishma Dev is also, he's not an ordinary person. He's lived for absolutely, I think, thousands of years. He's took part in thousands of battles, and there isn't anything he doesn't know about Dharma. He has complete knowledge of all aspects of Dharma. Yeah. So And this I was reflecting on how, this is perfection of life. Bhishma Dev, he's led a perfect life, and now he's going to show a perfect way of leaving the world. And we can see also, we have many contemporary examples in our International Society of Krishna Consciousness, of many great souls who have perfected their lives through Krishna consciousness, through a life of loving devotion. So like Grandfather Bhishma Dev, he is poised now at the stage of leaving the world of birth and death. As we know, in the Bhagavad Gita, it's described whatever one thinks of at the time of death, that destination he will attain without fail. And that depends upon the life one has led. So Grandfather Bhishma Dev's example is quite profound, because, as you know, when a devotee is leaving the world, we'll hopefully, for the most part, they're surrounded by devotees, other devotees who are chanting the holy name. Now, the holy name is non-different from Krishna. So it's considered there that Krishna is present in the form of his holy name. But still, this Shakshat Darshan, this direct manifestation, or this direct presence of Krishna, Krishna is there before Grandfather Bhishma Dev. And as we will hear described how Grandfather Bhishma Dev, at one point, he fixes his complete attention on Krishna, who's actually personally present. And also is glorified here is, as you know, Grandfather Bhishma, his body is shot through with arrows, and he's lying on a veritable bed of arrows. But then, as Prabhupada describes in the purport there, he's perfectly, his mind and senses, or his mind and faculties, are completely clear. He actually doesn't feel any pain at all. It's described in the Mahabharata that he experiences complete transcendental state of consciousness, and he understands that it's by the grace of Krishna. So here we read how he's perfectly greeting. Of course, he's not able to physically greet all the sages, but he actually gives them acknowledgement, and he gives them respect, and he gives them respect according to their station, according to their position. So, as described, he perfectly knows how to apply Dharma. Now, it's not easily understood in all situations how to apply Dharmic principles, because Dharmic principles are subject to change according to time, place, and circumstance. So what aspects of Dharma you apply in a particular time, place, and circumstance is often different. So it's not easily understood. And that was very much highlighted. It's interesting because Bhishma Dev, the knower of all Dharma, when we come to the pastime of Draupadi's disrobing, at that point, Dharma seemed to be confused. The time, the place, and the circumstance, it wasn't so clear of exactly what to do. And even now, you hear there's even discussions now with devotees describing that incident and what was the best thing to do. And even Grandfather Bhishma Dev, interestingly, that he is described because he was he was eating the grains of the Kauravas, isn't it? So it's described at that time, we could say, by the arrangement of the Lord, we could say, by the arrangement of the Lord, he was unsure of how to act, in particular time, place, and circumstance. And it's described there in the Mahabharata that Dharma is difficult to is just like sand or just like dust. That the more you grind it, then the finer it becomes. Yeah. So, and this was also seen when Yudhisthira as well. He's Dharmaraj, so he is a knower of Dharma, and there's a wonderful incident where Arjuna comes back with Draupadi after winning Draupadi in the Swayamvara. And as we know, when he came back, Kunti asked, "What have you brought?" So he said, "I brought some. I brought what did he say? I brought something. I brought back a arms. Yeah, I brought back arms." He was, he's brought back Draupadi. And the first thing Kunti said, she said, "Oh, then let it be shared with all of your brothers." Yeah. So that meant one lady would marry 4 men, five. Yeah, the 5 Pandavas. Yeah. So that was a bit of that doesn't really normally happen. Yeah. That is against Dharma. Yeah, that is against Dharma. So the way that it was ascertained that it was dharmic, one of the ways that it was ascertained that it was dharmic is because it sat in the heart of Maharaj Yudhisthira and didn't cause him disturbance. Yeah, because he was such a dharmic person that it sat within his mind. So therefore, they considered this must be a reason, mean it's dharmic. And then I think Srila Vyasadeva comes and he gives some histories. So this is what they would normally do. You see discussions in the Bhagavatam and in the Mahabharata about a certain incident happened, is happening, a king's in a certain situation. Like this is discussed again and again in the Mahabharata. You see the kings or the Pandavas in a certain situation. And then the sages come and then they give evidences and examples from previous similar situations to try and understand what is the correct thing to do according to time, place, and circumstance. Yeah. And this was also Arjuna's dilemma. He also didn't know what was the correct thing to do according to the time, place, and circumstance. And interesting there as well is that Yudhisthira Maharaj also he didn't understand fully. There's that pastime where Ashwatthama is wreaking havoc. If I got to forget, he's wreaking havoc in the. He's literally it's described like he's like a scythe shearing wheat. He's going through the Pandava army, and he's destroying thousands and thousands of troops. So Ashwatthama, Dronacharya, Dronacharya. This is Dronacharya who's creating havoc amongst the Pandava army. And it was known that he had great affection and attachment for his son, Ashwatthama. I think you know what pastime we're going to explain now. Yeah, Ashwatthama. And the only thing that would stop him in his tracks was to hear that Ashwatthama had been killed. So as we know the story, as it unfolds, so then who's going to tell him that? I mean, Ashwatthama was the battlefield is massive. It's miles and miles, and so what they did, so to tell Dronacharya that Ashwatthama is dead, and who's going to tell him? He won't believe anyone. But there's one person he would believe if he was told that his son was dead, and that was Yudhisthira Maharaj. Yeah. So then Yudhisthira Maharaj was asked to do that, but he wouldn't do it because he didn't understand. I mean, the highest principle is Bhagavat Dharma. Bhagavat Dharma means you act according to the directions of the Supreme, regardless of worldly Dharma. Yeah. That's the highest principle. Yeah. So Yudhisthira Maharaj, as we know, he had Bhima killed an elephant called Ashwatthama. Then Yudhisthira Maharaj said, Ashwatthama, the elephant has been killed. In that way, yeah. And also this point of Dharma, this point of Dharma, knowing what to do and what not to do. This also comes up in the pastime of Ajamil, who had led a sinful life, a very sinful life. And the details are given there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And at the end of his life, as we know, then the Yamadutas came to take him for punishment. And he called out the name of his son, isn't it? He called out the name of his son. He happens to called Narayan. He called his youngest son Narayan. And then the Vishnu Dutas came. And then there was a discussion between the Vishnu Dutas and the Yamadutas. The Vishnu Dutas, they asked, why are you taking the soul away for punishment to Yamaraj, your master? But what question is that? It seemed quite obvious because he committed so many sinful activities. And interesting, they mentioned specifically that because he also ate the food cooked by a prostitute. That's one of and there's a whole section in the Mahabharata as well where it's spoken about the persons or where you should take food. Yeah, there's a whole section given there, and they used to take it in Vedic times, to take it very, very seriously about where you eat and who cooks. As we know, Brahmanas would traditionally only eat what they would cook, or only from other Brahmanas, etc. Yeah, so this was taken as anyway, they gave that as one reason to take him to hell because he eating contaminated food. Of course, other sinful activities as well. But then the point we're bringing up here, there was discussion, and the Vishnu Dutas asked what is Dharma to the Yamadutas, and they correctly explained what is in the Vedas is Dharma, what is not in the Vedas is Adharma. This Ajamil has been going against all Vedic principles. Yeah. He's been doing irreligious activities. So then the Vishnu Dutas then brought up the subject of Bhagavat Dharma. Yeah. In other words, he had chanted the holy name of the Lord, so therefore he was free from any sinful reactions. Yeah. So that was another discussion in the Srimad Bhagavatam about the subject of Dharma, what is to be done at a particular time and place. Now, Grandfather Bhishma himself has lived a perfect dharmic life. And again, this is evidence that Krishna is actually present before him. So as he breathes his last, his eyes are going to be fixed on the Lord. Yeah. So that's perfect. He's actually perfected his life. And perhaps this is the most glorious thing about Grandfather Bhishma Deva. At the end of his life, he fixes his heart and mind on the Supreme, on the Krishna. And his passing is compared, or we could say, if we go to the Chaitanya Charitamrita and the passing of Haridas Thakur, Haridas Thakur's passing is compared to that of Grandfather Bhishma Deva. Yeah, specifically given as a comparison. Yeah, because he, the same as we know the pastime, he did not want to survive after the passing of Lord Chaitanya. He had that desire to actually leave before Lord Chaitanya would leave. So as we know, this is described there, the passing of Haridas Thakur. There's a wonderful chapter in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he passes while looking either at the lotus face or the Lord's lotus feet is described. Yeah. So, so this is back to this point of leaving the world. One we all experience different details, or we all having a different experience of the world according to our karma, good and bad. Yeah, we all meet different ailments, or we all, but there's one thing that we're all going to experience at some point, and that's just like Grandfather Bhishma Dev and Haridas Thakur, we're all going to leave the world. Yeah. And it's already there on our calendar, so to speak. Yeah. The dates on our calendar is actually there, probably, and our calendar is going to be there after we leave. Still going to be there, obviously. I'm just highlighting, I'm just bringing this up because we make plans not to die. We make plans of how to live. Except devotees of the Lord, ultimately our life is a preparation for that time. Yeah. So again, this is a great inspiration of Haridas Thakur and Grandfather Bhishma Dev. There was nothing else on their mind apart from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah. So I remember, I had this experience. I used to work as a carpenter before I took up Krishna consciousness, and I used to work on a building site. So sometimes I call this the wisdom learned on a building site. There is such a thing. But I remember my boss, he was hanging on a front door, and this elderly man came out and he was checking on the quality of the door. So my boss, he told him, "You don't worry about this door, it's going to see you out." That's for sure. Don't worry about this door, mate. It's going to see you out. Yeah. So the man took the step back. Yeah, really, yeah, you're right. Actually, definitely going to see me out. So let us not die, as Prabhupada said. Let us not die in ignorance. Die like cats and dogs. Yeah. I remember also there was a class back to Vijay Purnamaj was given a class, and he was speaking on this subject of the passing of Grandfather Bhishma Dev, and he was bringing up the point that actually it's very rare. Most people, there's a large percentage of people who actually die on their own. Unfortunately, that's the nature of this stage of Kali. Yeah, or estranged relationships, etc. There's many persons, unfortunately, who actually die alone. But Grandfather Bhishma Dev, he's surrounded by so many sages from all the universe, all different parts of the universe. They're actually coming to see him pass. So therefore we don't want to waste our life. We don't want to waste our time. We don't want to die in ignorance. Yeah? We don't want to be fascinated with the temporary. We should be absorbed in the eternal. So, in other words, every day we should act. In other words, we need to connect everything we do with devotional service. Yeah. Whatever we're doing in life, we should connect it with, or try and connect it as an offering to the Supreme. Yeah? In other words, we want to be, our activities now should nourish us in our spiritual life. And that's quite an art of how we can actually connect our life and activities to Krishna so that we're being nourished spiritually. And we're not being bewildered by the temporary allurements of the material world. So this is an art, and this is what Grandfather Bhishma Dev showed. He was a great devotee of the Lord, and he actually there's that whole pastime where a wonderful picture where he has his arms in the air. This is as Krishna's coming towards him. As we know, the pastime is coming to kill Bhishma Dev because he's wreaking havoc in the army of the Pandavas. And he has this relationship with Krishna, this, was it Viras? Yeah, this chivalrous, how he would very much appreciate Krishna at the battle of Kurukshetra. Yeah, there's this description he gives of seeing the, you could say, the transcendental wounds or the blood on Krishna, or his sweat as he's fighting. But in other words, he has been devoted to the Supreme Lord throughout his whole life. So it's quite natural for him to be completely absorbed in the Supreme, in Krishna, at the time of leaving the world. Yeah. So, in other words, we don't know, it's just why I brought up this point about the time that we're going to leave this world. It's not exactly known. Maharaj Parikshit, he was blessed, he had 7 days, So therefore we should be trying to work, everything we do, we should be do it in such a way that it's releasing us from karma. This is Krishna conscious activities. If we connect our activities up to Krishna, it can release us from karma. Yeah. And it can qualify us to enter into the spiritual world. Yeah? So, and Bhishma, his thoughts are focused on Krishna and Krishna alone. Yeah. So again, this is probably the most, this is probably the most glorious aspect of the glories of Grandfather Bhishma Dev, that he's actually perfected his life and he's fully absorbed in Krishna. So there's a few thoughts I had on these verses. If anyone has any questions or comments, we've got a few minutes left. You can ask. Anything to add? Everyone's still there with us? I haven't sent everyone to sleep.
No, bro, we're still there. Thank you so much.
So let's just, let's read. And these verses are very wonderful verses. The next few verses that come up are also so profound. And it highlights another point of Grandfather Bhishma Dev, how he's actually on his deathbed, but he's feeling so much affection for the Pandavas. Yeah. He's not just thinking about his own pain, although he's completely transcendental to it, but he's actually thinking, and it's described, you see the verses will then go on to describe how he sees the Pandavas and he understands that they're born of the gods, they're actually born of the demigods, as we know, but they was put into so much tribulation, so many difficulties that was actually put into. So a good lesson for us here is that Grandfather Bhishma Dev then concludes that this must be the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. And he describes, verse there describes it, no one can understand the plans of the Lord. Even great philosophers, they inquire exhaustively. But no one can understand. Who could have possibly understood ultimately all the events that happened up to the battle of Kurukshetra was all ultimately arranged by the Lord. And he elaborates on that there, so we've got that coming. Okay, so if there's no question, let me just check the chat here. Please, something from Mrinalini Radhika. Excuse me if I pronounced that wrong. Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Thank you for the very nice class. Are you able to give any tips how to explain to newcomers with no inkling of what Dharma is, how Draupadi came to have 5 husbands? Yeah, that's not, that's described, again, as I mentioned, it's described in the Mahabharata. And Vyasadeva gives the examples of, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's there's 7 sages who marry the daughter of the moon god. And it's described there. I can't. but it's there in the Srimad Bhagavatam. There is a similar account is actually given. Now, it's not to be. It's something which is extraordinary, and there is detailed accounts which I can't bring to mind now. But there's detailed accounts of how Draupadi came into be in that position, according to previous activities, according to previous karma. And she's such a powerful sattvi. She's such a powerful person that it doesn't degrade her at all. It is not degrading. That's as much as I can say for now about looking into the details. The details are given in the Mahabharata and describe that she's a greatly exalted person. And Vyasadeva gives all the different reasons how it's come to this point and how it's considered to be completely dharmic. And one of the reasons that's given is, as I mentioned, Maharaj Yudhisthira. Yeah. So that's as much as I can say on that without doing some more study. Yeah, it will take a bit of study and you can find out the details there. So how can we ensure all our activities are related to Krishna? Yeah, so that's a great art. Prabhupada said we should mold our lives in such a way that we can always think of Krishna. Yeah. So in essence, we should have a regulated program of Krishna conscious activities. Yeah. We should be engaging sadhana and bhakti. We should be chanting 16 rounds or whatever. At some point, we should take vows to chant 16 rounds. And more simply, because say, another way we can make sure our activities are connected to Krishna, our work is connected to Krishna, and it's a source of nourishment for our spiritual life, is that, in other words, we should sacrifice the fruits of our work to Krishna to some degree or another. So say, for example, one is working, then generally today work means the fruits in the form of, say, money comes. So then quite simply, if we have we might have an altar at home, and then as we know as devotees, before we eat anything, we offer it as a sacrifice, prashadam, to the Lord. So, for example, one works, one gets money, one is shopping, and then one is buying food stuff, but that's not going to be enjoyed by us. That is first going to be offered to the Lord as a sacrifice. So in that way, we are dovetailing our work or the results of our work as a sacrifice to Krishna. Or we can also, there's so many different projects. You have a wonderful project here in Leicester. So much is needed, so you can help with that. But it has to be, in other words, our work has to be connected. It's not just like something mental. Oh yeah, everything I do is for Krishna. No, it has to be some yukta. Has to be some connection that you do, and that means you give some of the fruits away. Yeah, and that's the process of where we engage our karma, yoga, in the Lord's service. And then from that comes a sense of detachment. So that's one way. First, as I mentioned, to have a systematic, regulated practice of Krishna consciousness. And then to link our specific, say, our work or activities to Krishna. We have an altar at home. We can spend, if we get extra money, instead of buying the latest iPhone, we can buy some nice outfits for our deities. Yeah. So like that, anything that comes from our regulated activities in the form of, artha, we engage in Krishna's service. Yeah. We maintain ourselves comfortably so we can engage in bhakti. Over and above that, we can sacrifice for Krishna. Okay. Hare Krishna. Okay, if there's any other questions. Thank you. Let me just see who's with us today. I saw a few names. I probably don't know many of you. I might know many of you if I see you. Priya Mataji, I think I know her. We're connected. She's doing we're doing a Head Pujari seminar. Hare Krishna. So thank you, everyone. If there's any last questions, if not, we can. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
So much,
Thank you.
Manohar Prabhu, for a wonderful class. It was very nice to have you, and I'm sure everyone from Leicester congregation are enlightened by your words of wisdom. Thank you so much. I was very much disappointed when you initially mentioned that you won't be able to give class, but ultimately you all ended well. Thank you so much once again. His Grace Manohar Prabhu ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Press the red button. It will disappear.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you for a wonderful class.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu, for a wonderful class.
Krishna. Hare Bol.
Thank you very much. Haribol.
Hare Krishna.